Let me take you back to the roots of my story, where everything began, a tale not just of betrayal but of a lifetime of being overshadowed and undervalued. I'm Elena, a tenured professor at one of the largest universities in the northeastern United States. At 42, I've carved out a name for myself in the world of molecular biology, publishing groundbreaking research papers and leading projects that could change lives. But none of this mattered to my family. To them, I was always second best, always less than Lisa, my younger sister. Lisa, now 38, has lived her life as the golden child. She's the one who dazzles with charm, glitz, and glamour, working in media as a local TV personality. Her life, a series of red carpets, designer outfits, and exotic vacations, all paid for by our parents. Meanwhile, I spent years buried in labs, poring over microscopes and equations, trying to make sense of the universe's smallest building blocks. When I needed funding for expensive lab equipment during critical stages of my research, my parents scoffed. "Science won't pay off tomorrow," they said dismissively. Yet when Lisa wanted to enroll in theatrical classes or jet off to Paris for another photo shoot, their wallets opened without hesitation. It wasn't just about money, it was about validation. They praised Lisa's every move while brushing mine aside like crumbs on a tablecloth. The injustice stung, but what cut deeper was the constant belittling. Every achievement of mine felt diminished under their gaze. My first major publication in a prestigious journal, barely acknowledged. Instead, they gushed over Lisa's latest TV segment, calling her brilliant and captivating. The message was clear: no matter how hard I worked, I would never shine as brightly as Lisa in their eyes. Amidst this suffocating environment, there was one beacon of hope: my grandmother Martha. She was the only person who truly saw me. While my parents were busy cheering Lisa on screen, Grandma sat beside me, celebrating each milestone I achieved. "Elena," she'd say, her voice trembling yet firm despite her frailty, "you have a gift, not everyone understands it, but don't let anyone dull your brilliance." Those words became my lifeline, especially as her health began to decline. Watching her grow weaker year by year left an ache in my chest. Without her, I feared I'd be completely alone in a family that seemed determined to erase me. But loneliness wasn't the only challenge. As time passed, the imbalance between Lisa and me grew more pronounced. For instance, when I requested financial support to attend an international conference, a pivotal moment for networking and advancing my career, they refused outright. "Why can't you manage with what you have?" my father snapped. In contrast, Lisa received carte blanche to pursue whatever whim struck her fancy, whether it was art lessons or luxury spa retreats. This disparity gnawed at me, planting seeds of resentment that would later bloom into something far darker. Looking back, these early dynamics set the stage for everything that followed: the betrayals, the heartbreak, and ultimately, my journey toward reclaiming my worth. What started as familial favoritism evolved into something toxic, shaping not only my relationship with Lisa but also my view of love, trust, and self-worth. And though I didn't realize it then, this foundation of neglect and inequality would lead to the most devastating moment of my life, a moment that shattered illusions and forced me to confront truths long buried. The engagement party was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, a celebration of love, commitment, and a future I had envisioned since childhood. But instead, it became the darkest chapter in my story, one that would forever alter how I viewed trust, loyalty, and family. The evening began like any other formal gathering at my parents' house: champagne glasses clinking, soft classical music playing in the background, and Lisa flitting around as if she were the guest of honor rather than me. She had insisted on helping with the arrangements, though her version of help mostly involved critiquing my choices and imposing her preferences. Her behavior should have been a red flag, but I dismissed it as typical Lisa: domineering, self-centered, and oblivious to boundaries. As the night unfolded, I noticed something unsettling. David, my fiancé, seemed distracted. His gaze followed Lisa whenever she entered the room, and their laughter echoed louder than necessary. At first, I told myself I was overthinking things. After all, this was David, the man who had promised to stand by me through thick and thin. Yet, deep down, a gnawing unease crept into my chest. When I realized I hadn't seen him for a while, I excused myself from the crowd and headed upstairs to look for him. My heart pounded with each step, though I couldn't pinpoint why. I stopped outside the door of my old bedroom, the very same room where I used to dream of a happy future, where I spent countless nights studying for my PhD qualifications. It was symbolic of everything I had worked so hard to achieve: stability, success, and finally, love. But now, standing there, I felt an inexplicable chill. The faint murmur of voices seeped through the closed door, and my hand froze on the doorknob. For a moment, I hesitated, torn between curiosity and dread. Then, summoning what little courage I had left, I pushed the door open. What I saw shattered every illusion I'd ever held about love and family. There they were, David and Lisa, entangled on the bed where I once imagined building a life with someone who truly cared for me. Lisa didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Instead, she smirked, her lips curling into that same condescending grin I'd grown up despising. "Oh, Elena," she drawled, her voice dripping with mockery, "you really thought anyone would choose you over me? You're too rigid, too dull. Face it, sis, you'll always be second best." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer, but it was the sight of David lying there, his shirt unbuttoned, his expression guilty yet indifferent, that broke something inside me. How could he betray me like this, and with her, of all people? Why, Lisa? I wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand answers, but no sound escaped my lips. My legs carried me backward until I stumbled out of the room, my vision blurred by tears. Behind me, I heard David's voice calling after me, laced with false sincerity. "Elena, wait, it's not what you think." But it was exactly what I thought, and worse. Downstairs, my parents intercepted me before I could reach the front door. Their faces fell when they saw the devastation written across mine. "Elena, sweetheart, please don't make a scene," my mother pleaded, her tone desperate. "Think about your sister's marriage. Not my broken engagement, not the pain ripping through my soul, but Lisa's marriage." My father chimed in, his voice low and anxious. "You know Richard has fidelity issues. There's a prenup. She could lose everything. Elena, please consider the impact this will have on the family." "The family?" I spat, my voice trembling with rage. "The same family that's always put Lisa's happiness above mine. The same family that ignored my achievements, belittled my dreams, and now expects me to shield their golden child from the consequences of her own actions." I pushed past them, ignoring their pleas, and walked straight into the crowded living room. Silence fell as everyone turned to stare at me. David appeared moments later, hastily buttoning his shirt, while Lisa stood smugly in the doorway, her flawless makeup slightly smudged. My voice was eerily calm as I addressed the guests. "I'm sorry, but the engagement is off. Please enjoy the food and drinks." Cats rippled through the room, followed by frantic whispers. My mother's heels clicked against the floor as she rushed toward me, crying and pleading for me to reconsider. Lisa watched silently, her lips curled into a satisfied smile. As I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, David called after me, demanding a chance to explain, but I didn't stop. I drove home, packed up every trace of him, his rare scientific books, his clothes, his research papers, and dropped them off at a storage facility. By morning, I had blocked his number, his email, and every social media account. Later, I learned that Richard, Lisa's husband, had been absent because he was closing another $1 million deal. He had no idea his wife was destroying my engagement while he worked tirelessly to provide for their luxurious lifestyle. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who funded Lisa's extravagance was completely unaware of her betrayal. Meanwhile, my parents bombarded me with messages, guilt-tripping me about ruining Lisa's marriage and lecturing me about family loyalty. I blocked their numbers too. That night, sitting alone in my half-empty apartment, I made a decision. I deleted every contact tied to my toxic family, starting with Lisa. With each name erased, I felt lighter. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. In the aftermath of the engagement party, my world crumbled into pieces. The betrayal wasn't just David's infidelity or Lisa's cruelty, it was the realization that I had spent my entire life fighting for scraps of validation in a family that never truly saw me. Sleep became an elusive stranger, and when it did come, it was haunted by nightmares of their faces, Lisa smirking, David's guilty eyes, my parents' cold indifference. Nights stretched endlessly as I lay awake, questioning whether I deserved love or even happiness at all. Work became my refuge, though not without its own challenges. My colleagues began noticing changes in my demeanor. Once known for my sharp focus and meticulous attention to detail, I now found myself distracted, snapping at minor mistakes, and struggling to meet deadlines. The lab, once my sanctuary, felt suffocating under the weight of my thoughts. Some coworkers whispered behind my back, others tried to offer sympathy, but their pity only deepened my shame. One particularly grueling day, after hours of poring over data that refused to make sense, I decided to grab coffee from the campus cafe, a rare break from the relentless grind. That decision would change everything. As fate would have it, Michael walked in moments later. He was tall, with kind eyes and an air of quiet confidence that set him apart from the usual academic types who frequented the cafe. Our meeting, however, was anything but graceful. In my exhaustion, I tripped over the edge of the counter, spilling scalding coffee all over his pristine white shirt. Mortified, I stammered apologies while grabbing napkins to help clean up the mess. To my surprise, instead of irritation, he laughed, a warm, genuine sound that caught me off guard. "Well," he said, smiling, "this is quite different from our email exchanges." His words startled me. We had been corresponding professionally for months about potential collaborations between our departments. His emails were thoughtful and insightful, but I hadn't expected him to recognize me outside the confines of formal communication. As we stood there, awkwardly dabbing at his ruined shirt, I couldn't shake the fear that this man might turn out to be another David, charming on the surface, yet hollow beneath. But something about Michael felt different. Maybe it was the way his smile reached his eyes, or how he didn't rush to fill the silence with empty pleasantries. When he casually suggested replacing my spilled coffee with a fresh cup, I hesitated. After everything I'd endured, trusting someone new, especially in academia, felt impossible. We sat together at a small table near the window, sunlight streaming through the glass. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to relax. Michael asked questions, not the superficial ones people usually posed out of politeness, but real, curious inquiries about my research and passions. And like David, who often feigned interest before steering conversations toward himself, Michael listened intently, nodding along as if every word mattered. By the end of our impromptu meeting, he mentioned being in town again soon for another conference and tentatively asked if we could meet again. Against every instinct screaming caution, I heard myself say yes. That night, sitting alone in my office, I replayed the conversation in my mind. Doubts crept in. What if this was too soon, too risky? The next morning, as I prepared to leave for work, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Lisa's having a hard time. She needs her sister." I stared at the screen, anger bubbling beneath the surface. Without hesitation, I deleted the message. Some bridges weren't meant to be rebuilt. When Michael and I met again, nerves nearly got the better of me. Halfway through our second coffee date, I excused myself to leave, convinced I was making a mistake. Sensing my discomfort, Michael gently stopped me. "Elena," he said softly, "I'm not your enemy." Those simple words unraveled something inside me. Tears welled up unexpectedly, and for the first time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I could trust again. Over time, our connection deepened. Michael shared stories of his own struggles, navigating a competitive field, dealing with failures, and finding strength in vulnerability. He spoke openly about his family, who supported his unconventional career path of blending architecture with scientific innovation. Their encouragement reminded me painfully of what I lacked growing up. Yet, rather than fueling resentment, these conversations gave me hope. Hope that relationships could exist without manipulation or ulterior motives. Hope that I could build something authentic. The relationship between Michael and me grew in ways I never thought possible, but it wasn't without its challenges. Distance became our first adversary. Michael lived in a different state, his architectural projects keeping him tethered to his office while my research anchored me to mine. The miles between us felt insurmountable at times, like an invisible wall that no amount of longing could tear down. We relied heavily on emails and video calls, each exchange filled with equal parts excitement and frustration. There were days when technical glitches interrupted our conversations, leaving us staring at frozen screens or hearing only static. Those moments tested my patience, but they also taught me something invaluable. Love isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. When we did manage to see each other, those meetings became sacred. Every hug felt like coming home after years of wandering in the wilderness. During one such visit, Michael invited me to dinner at a small Italian eatery near his university. It was unassuming, a dimly lit room with checkered tablecloths and the faint aroma of garlic wafting through the air, but it became unforgettable because of what happened there. As we shared plates of pasta and stories from our childhoods, Michael leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "You know," he said softly, "you're unlike anyone I've ever met. You make science sound poetic." His words caught me off guard, not just because of their sincerity but because they reminded me how rarely I'd been celebrated for who I truly was. But even as our bond deepened, shadows of my past lingered. My trust had been shattered too many times, first by David, then by Lisa, and finally by my own family. Each time Michael mentioned taking our relationship further, panic bubbled inside me. What if this was all too good to be true? What if he woke up one day and realized I wasn't enough? These fears gnawed at me, especially during quiet nights when the weight of my history pressed down hardest. One evening, after a particularly vulnerable conversation over video call, I confessed my doubts to him. Instead of dismissing them, Michael listened intently, his expression softening. "Elena," he said, his voice steady, "I can't promise you won't get hurt again. But I can promise I'll do everything in my power to protect your heart." His reassurance helped, but the real turning point came when I met his family. And like my own, Michael's family welcomed me with open arms. Linda, his mother, was a beacon of warmth and kindness. She pulled me aside during my second visit, her hands clasped around a photo album. "Let me show you something," she said, flipping to a picture of a young Michael standing proudly beside a demolished shed. He tried to rebuild the garage using his father's tools. Ended up destroying half the backyard, she laughed, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Then, more seriously, she added, "Michael has always been passionate about creating spaces where people can thrive. And now, he talks about you the same way. He says you're the smartest woman in the world." Her words brought tears to my eyes, not because of flattery, but because of the stark contrast to how my own family treated me. Despite these affirmations, saying yes to Michael's eventual proposal terrified me. When he presented me with the ring, a simple yet exquisite band accompanied by a matching desk lamp for late-night research sessions, I hesitated. The gesture was so thoughtful, so uniquely him, yet fear paralyzed me. Memories of David's betrayal and Lisa's mockery flooded back, whispering cruel reminders of my supposed unworthiness. Sensing my turmoil, Michael took my hand. "This isn't about fixing you," he said firmly. "It's about building something together, something real." That night, I called Grandma Martha, seeking guidance. Her advice was simple but profound. "Family isn't about blood, Elena. It's about choosing people who see you for who you are and love you anyway." Her words echoed in my mind as I stared at the ring on my finger. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserved happiness. Still, I couldn't shake the fear entirely. Accepting Michael's proposal meant risking everything again, but it also meant stepping into a future where I wasn't defined by my scars. The days leading up to my wedding with Michael were supposed to be filled with joy and anticipation, but instead, they became a battleground of emotions. My parents, relentless in their attempts to control the narrative, sent an email that made my blood boil. "Elena," it read, "we've decided to invite Lisa to your wedding. She's your sister, after all, and family should always come together on special occasions. The audacity of their request was staggering, especially given everything Lisa had done, betraying me so cruelly at my engagement party, mocking my dreams, and destroying what little trust I still held for them. But what truly infuriated me was the thinly veiled threat tucked into their message: "If you refuse, we will never forgive you." I sat at my desk that night, staring at the blank email draft window. Each time I tried to write a response, anger clouded my thoughts. How could they demand this of me? After years of prioritizing Lisa over me, belittling my achievements, and forcing me to shield her from the consequences of her actions, they now expected me to welcome her back with open arms. I rewrote the email countless times, each version more forceful than the last. Finally, as dawn broke through my curtains, I hit send. My final reply was firm and unyielding: "Mom, Dad, I have made it clear that Lisa is not welcome at my wedding. If you cannot respect this boundary, then neither of you are invited either." When I told Michael about the situation, his calm demeanor grounded me. "Whatever you want to do, I'm with you," he said simply. His unwavering support gave me the clarity I needed. With his encouragement, I resolved not to let my family dictate my life any longer. This was my day's celebration of love, resilience, and the family I had chosen for myself. On the morning of the wedding, tension hung thick in the air. Despite our meticulous planning, including individual QR codes for guests and strict security measures, I couldn't shake the nagging fear that something would go wrong. And then, just as I was adjusting my veil in the bridal suite, Linda rushed in, her face pale. "Elena, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "They brought Lisa through a service entrance. Your mother insisted, saying we couldn't exclude a pregnant woman." My stomach churned as I processed her words. Somehow, despite every precaution, Lisa had managed to infiltrate the ceremony. When I stepped into the hall, the sight of her nearly knocked the breath out of me. She wore a tight, scarlet dress that screamed for attention, her swollen belly impossible to ignore. Her smug grin sent waves of nausea crashing over me. It was the same expression she'd worn 3 years ago when I caught her with David. For a moment, I felt paralyzed by rage. But then I remembered why I was here. Today wasn't about Lisa or my parents. It was about choosing a future free from their toxicity. As the reception unfolded, Lisa seized her opportunity. Rising from her seat, she clinked her champagne glass and began speaking as if she were the maid of honor. "My dear sister Elena has always been someone I've tried to protect," she announced, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "From steering her away from terrible mistakes to ensuring her happiness, I've only ever wanted the best for her." Beneath the table, Michael squeezed my hand, silently urging me to stay composed. Around us, my research team stiffened, ready to intervene if necessary, while Linda looked poised to intervene herself. But I didn't need anyone else to fight this battle. Standing up calmly, I raised my own glass. "I think it's time for the bride to make a toast of her own," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Every eye in the room turned to me, the silence heavy with anticipation. Fixing my gaze on Lisa, I began recounting the truth: how she had betrayed me with David, how my parents had pressured me to stay silent, and how they had enabled her destructive behavior for years. As I spoke, Lisa's confident facade crumbled. Then came the moment that shattered the fragile illusion she had built. Tom, her husband, stood abruptly, his face contorted with fury. "Is the baby even mine?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. Lisa froze, one hand instinctively covering her stomach. Panic flashed across her features as she realized the gravity of the situation. Without another word, Tom stormed out of the hall, leaving behind chaos and whispers. Lisa scrambled after him, her heels clicking frantically against the floor. As the doors slammed shut behind them, a collective sigh of relief swept through the room. My grandmother rose next, holding her glass high. "To Elena and Michael," she declared, her voice ringing with pride. "To truth, to real love, and to the family we choose." Cheers erupted around us, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The months following our wedding marked the beginning of a new chapter of life that was finally mine to shape, free from the toxic shadows of my past. But even in this newfound happiness, old fears lingered like ghosts waiting to resurface. One morning, as I stared at the pregnancy test in my trembling hands, terror gripped me. The positive results should have been joyous, but instead, it brought back memories of my own childhood, the suffocating expectations, the constant comparisons, and the emotional manipulation I endured under the guise of family. Would I become like my parents? Could I protect my child from the same pain? Michael sensed my unease before I could voice it. Wrapping his arms around me, he whispered softly, "Our baby will grow up surrounded by love, not control. They'll know they're valued for who they are, not what others expect them to be." His words were simple yet profound, anchoring me when waves of doubt threatened to pull me under. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where my child wouldn't have to fight for scraps of validation or feel overshadowed by anyone else's achievements. As our family grew, so did our dreams. Michael and I collaborated on designing a state-of-the-art laboratory near his university, a space that blended cutting-edge research with personal touches reflecting our shared vision. In one corner of the lab, Michael built a secure play area for our child, complete with colorful cushions, interactive toys, and safety features designed with meticulous care. This way, he explained, you can work while still being close to them. It wasn't just practical. It symbolized everything we wanted for our family, a balance between ambition and love, innovation and intimacy. Meanwhile, Lisa's world unraveled further, mirroring the chaos she had sown. The paternity test results confirmed Tom's suspicions. The baby she carried wasn't his. He filed for divorce immediately, severing all ties with her. Gone were the luxurious vacations, designer clothes, and extravagant lifestyle funded by his wealth. Now, Lisa returned to live with our parents, clinging to whatever remnants of privilege she could salvage. But life under their roof proved far less glamorous than she anticipated. Without Richard's financial support or Tom's indulgence, Lisa struggled to adapt to a reality devoid of material comforts. Arguments erupted frequently, each one more explosive than the last. She accused our parents of favoritism, ironically, the very behavior she had exploited for years. "You always cared more about appearances than me," she screamed during one particularly heated confrontation. My mother, usually calm, snapped back, "We gave you everything, Lisa, and look where it got us." Their once idyllic dynamic crumbled into bitterness, leaving Lisa isolated and resentful. Watching her downfall from afar, I felt no satisfaction, only a deep sadness for the choices that led her here. Yet, there was also clarity. Her unraveling served as a stark reminder of the consequences of selfishness and deceit. While Lisa fought to reclaim fragments of her shattered image, I focused on building something authentic. Every milestone in my pregnancy became a testament to resilience. The ultrasound appointments, the late-night conversations with Michael about names, and the quiet moments when I placed my hand on my growing belly, imagining the life we'd create together. When our son arrived, a tiny, perfect bundle named Alexander, I held him in my arms and cried tears of gratitude. This was redemption, not just for me but for every version of myself that had doubted love and belonging. Michael sat beside me, gazing at our newborn with awe. "He's going to change the world," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Together, we vowed to raise him in an environment rooted in kindness, curiosity, and mutual respect. Lisa's struggles continued to haunt her. Once accustomed to admiration and adoration, she now faced rejection at every turn. Our parents, burdened by guilt and regret, tried to mend fences, but their efforts only fueled Lisa's resentment. "Why didn't you stop me?" she demanded one evening, her voice laced with venom. "Why didn't you make me better?" Their silence spoke volumes. For the first time, they seemed to understand the damage wrought by years of unchecked indulgence and misplaced priorities. In contrast, my relationship with Michael flourished. We celebrated not only our professional successes but also the small victories of everyday life, cooking dinner together, watching sunsets over the lake, and marveling at Alex's first steps. Our home buzzed with laughter and warmth, a sanctuary built on trust and partnership. Even Grandma Martha joined in, knitting miniature lab coats for Alex and sharing stories of my early experiments. He's going to be brilliant, she declared proudly, her eyes twinkling. Looking back, I realized how far I'd come. My journey hadn't been easy. It had been fraught with betrayal, heartbreak, and self-doubt. But through it all, I learned what truly mattered: choosing people who see your worth, nurturing relationships based on honesty, and creating a legacy of love rather than control. As I tucked Alex into bed one night, I whispered, "You're loved exactly as you are." Those words weren't just for him, they were for me too. Looking back on my journey, I realized that life's greatest lessons often come wrapped in pain and struggle. The betrayal I endured from David, Lisa, and even my own parents was more than just personal heartbreak. It was a wake-up call. For years, I allowed myself to be defined by their expectations, their favoritism, and their inability to see me for who I truly am. But through the chaos, I discovered something profound. Family isn't about shared blood, it's about shared love, respect, and mutual support. The people who stood by me when I needed them most weren't those tied to me by biology. It was Michael, whose unwavering kindness helped me rebuild my shattered trust. It was my grandmother Martha, whose wisdom reminded me that I deserved better. And it was my research team, who celebrated my victories as if they were their own. These are the individuals who shaped my new definition of family: people who choose you, not because they have to, but because they genuinely value you. This realization didn't come easily. There were moments when fear nearly paralyzed me: the fear of being alone, of failing, or of never finding happiness again. But every time I chose to fight for myself, I grew stronger. When I blocked my parents' numbers after the engagement disaster, it felt like cutting off a limb. Yet, in doing so, I reclaimed my power. When I accepted Michael's proposal, I wasn't just saying yes to love. I was affirming my belief that I deserved a partnership built on equality and respect. Each step forward was a declaration: I matter. To anyone reading this, know this: true happiness doesn't fall into your lap. You have to fight for it, sometimes against forces that seem insurmountable. Whether it's walking away from toxic relationships, setting boundaries with manipulative family members, or daring to pursue dreams others deem unrealistic, the courage to stand up for yourself is transformative. Don't let anyone convince you that you're less worthy because you don't fit their mold. Your worth isn't negotiable. Lisa's downfall taught me another hard truth: actions have consequences. She spent years living recklessly, believing her charm and privilege would shield her from accountability. But when her world crumbled, losing Tom, her luxurious lifestyle, and even our parents' blind devotion, I saw firsthand how fragile a life built on lies can be. Meanwhile, I found strength in authenticity. By embracing vulnerability and choosing honesty over silence, I created a life rooted in genuine connections. Finally, I want to thank everyone who supported me through this journey: the friends, colleagues, and strangers turned allies who reminded me that I wasn't alone. To those still trapped in toxic environments, hear me: you deserve better. Happiness isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Surround yourself with people who uplift you, challenge you, and celebrate your uniqueness. Because at the end of the day, the only person you need to impress is yourself.